Thank you, Your Excellencies. My name is Lady Aaradyn Ghyoot. I hail from the Barony of Carolingia in the East Kingdom, which mundanely is the greater Boston area. And I'd like to thank you, Your Excellencies, for having me tonight to present this class. So on the topic of handouts, really quickly, there isn't one. This class was designed entirely to teach at Penzic. So there's no slides, and there isn't a handout because you get a lot of handouts at Penzic. However, I will put my email address in chat. If you have a desire for more information or clarification, please do get a hold of me. This class is two parts. The first part is interrogating your museum, and the second part is finding sources. And the interrogating your museum was born completely out of the understanding that not everybody has the background that I have. My mother is a curator of American art. I basically grew up in museums, and I have worked in museums myself. I have an insight to the museum world that maybe not everyone has. And in talking with some friends and discussing things like where they're trying to find sources when they're trying to get a hold of somebody, I figured that the clarity that I had could help other people, and so this class was born. The class is basically three parts, and it's very informal, and I will tell you that if you have a question, please post it to chat, but there will be an open question-answer period at the end as well. But the class is basically three parts. The first part being what to look for if you're unfamiliar with hunting down information in a museum on your own. The second part being who to speak to when you absolutely do have to finally speak to somebody. And the third part is actually a source finding class that was presented by a friend of mine who has recently received his laurel in dance and SCA research. And it is his source finding class that I present with his blessing. He's a really excellent researcher, and I'm really glad to be able to bring this information to everyone. So let's jump in. Or the first question really is, what are you looking for? Because it's great to just go to a museum and hope that they're going to have the information. But it's better to approach this in a targeted way. You wouldn't go shoe shopping at the grocery store. It's unlikely that you're going to find Norse artifact at MoMA. Knowing what museum you need to look for to begin with is really the crux of starting your search off on the best foot. Google is probably your best bet for that, but in this day and age, your fellow Scadians are actually a better bet for that. There is a good possibility that somebody's already done at least part of the research that you're looking for. In cases like that, it would be better than to speak to your local Scadians. But let's move on to the point where you've narrowed down your search and you know which museum you're trying to get a hold of. If you're local to that museum, ideal. Go straight in. If you're not, we'll get to that in a second. So let's assume that you can go into the museum and you're physically near the museum and can visit it in person. The first thing that you're going to want to do is speak with the information desk, find out if there are special exhibits that have not been listed on the website, and yes, that does happen. Find out if there are any artifacts that are being in for cleaning at the moment, which may not be on display, which might not be on their website. Some of these things can be done with a phone call if the museum is a little bit further away than you want a day trip to. And just ask general questions about what sort of artifacts they have on display, how they have them on display, what additional items they might have that are not listed on the website. Really, your best bet for talking to a museum is sadly not the curator. The curator is the person with the most information on your specific item. Let's say you're looking for a textile fragment. Unfortunately, the curator does not have time to talk to you. In most cases, the curator is doing a million other things, and despite the fact that they really would love to sit down and geek out with you about this very cool thing that they have studied a lot about, their job doesn't allow for that sort of time. Thankfully, And wonderfully, museums have an entire department that is just sitting there ready and waiting to talk to you. And that would be the education department. A lot of museums will have at least a moderate-sized education department. In some museums, that could be one person. In some museums, the education department is also the office manager or some other role in the museum. But every museum has one. And if there isn't anything listed on the website that says, this is the education department, general information would be the people to ask about that. The education department's job is outreach in the community as well as educational programming. Where that comes in for Scadians is they are the people who know firsthand everything that the museum has. So they know what resources they have on hand to help you and very easily can move forward with that. When you're speaking with the education department, first of all, you need to not use your SCA name. As proud as we are of our SCA personas, our SCA personas are absolutely nothing in the education world or in the museum world. They're going to want to talk to Erica Morton because Aaradyn Ghyoot is frankly not, it's not real enough for them, to be honest. When you're speaking with the museum, keep in mind that you are approaching them, and very importantly, approaching them as an independent scholar. Because while in the SCA, it's great to say, Aaradyn has done, these scrolls, this whatever, when you're speaking to a museum, you need to be the most professional version of yourself. In this case, you're now an independent researcher, and it is your job completely to present yourself in the most scholarly way that you can in order to gain a foothold in that world. It's one thing to say, I'm doing research because I want my dresses to fit better. It's another thing to say, I'm doing research specifically on this style dress from this time period in order to answer X, Y, and Z questions. And really, at the end of the day, that's what the museum wants to know. What are you ultimately going to be doing with this information? And that is very, very important to know. I recently did a research trip, well, I say recently, last year I did a research trip to Brandeis University, specifically to their museum library, in order to see some manuscripts that they had in their collection that fit the criteria for a research question I was trying to answer. Before I even saw the manuscripts, they were covered on a cart in the room, but before they were even brought out from under cover for me to look at, there was a lot of paperwork that I had to sign. The paperwork went through specifically, what am I going to be doing with this information? How am I presenting it? Who am I presenting it to? Am I getting paid to present this information to a group of people? Will I be publishing a paper containing any images that I take during the day? Am I selling the images that I'm going to take during the day? And I did actually have to sign off saying I would not reproduce these images in any way, shape, or form. So the photos that I have, I can use for my personal research, but I cannot put them into a handout for a class. I can put them into my documentation and present it in an A&S display where nobody's taking a copy of my documentation home with them, because then I'm not distributing it. I am simply presenting it with my research. But in cases like that, it's very, very important to read the fine print, because if you intend to put this on your blog, along with some of your research, some of those images that you take may not be eligible to do that. And the education department are the people who will go through very clearly and very, very straightforwardly with you what you are and are not allowed to do with that information. And to be clear, they're not trying to restrict the information from you. they're trying to control how that information is presented in the world, which is very important at the end of the day, because once something's out in the world, it's really hard to control it. And if you can control what you're doing with it from the get-go, you're a lot better. So we do have one question. How would you address people taking pictures of your documentation that contains photos that are not allowed to be reproduced? And that question was posted from Ava. Ava, thank you for that question. That's a very good question. Essentially, you would have to tell them no. In the case for the ANS documentation that I did, I was also a herald to their excellencies that day. So I wasn't able to be with my research and my documentation all day. And what I did was I took the pages of my documentation. I had all the images at the end, specifically so that I could take those pages, put them in my basket, and carry them with me, and therefore leave my documentation, the rest of my documentation, to be reviewed. But I really just kept those pages with me and took them. So unfortunately, people who came by when I wasn't there didn't see those support images. But I was there when the judges were there, so the judges did get to see them, which is maybe not ideal, but it is what it is. If it's a situation where you can be there all day, you can simply tell people you're not allowed to photograph these pages. Arrange some way to get them either I don't bind my documentation. I have it loose in a binder, so you can flip through the pages. Copyright is a very tricky beast, and mundanely, I'm an office manager, but more importantly, I'm a freelance photographer and have been since 1997. And so I do thoroughly understand copyright and what you can and can't do. Yes, Alan Roberts points out that it seems you can use the photographs to make drawings. That is accurate. You can use them as inspiration. In that case, I'm not sure you'd be able to go one for one, but if you used a portion of it, say the illuminated capital from the page, and not necessarily the entire page, I think that would probably fall within fair use. To be fair, the photographs that you're taking are restricted, not copyrighted. It's a very important distinction. It's a restricted use image, not a copyrighted image. The books themselves, I'm a scribe, as it said in the class description online. And so the majority of the manuscripts that we're looking at, I would say almost 99.9%, are in fact old enough to be under fair use. So in that case, no, that manuscript itself is not under copyright. And so using part of it, even 90% of it, to create a scroll is not illegal. But in specific cases, the image that you take can be restricted by the museum or library that owns that book. It's tricky, but at very least we can get access to the books and see them to answer our questions, which is better than not being able to see them at all. The second group of people that you want to talk to at a museum are actually the docents. And I'm not sure how many of you have interacted with docents over the years. I used to be part of a docent training team for the Delaware Art Museum. That's a lot of fun. In the future, if you have some time to volunteer, I would highly, highly recommend volunteering with docents. It is a ridiculously nerdy group of people, not unlike Scadians in many ways. Their outfits don't get quite as lavish as ours do, but they're still pretty fun. The docents, it is literally their job to research the exhibitions, the items in their collections. It is their job to know almost as much. Yes, the docents are in fact guides. They are the tour guides that you see walking around. While you might say, oh, they're just for tourists, they're not necessarily just for tourists. A lot of times the talks that they're giving are very well researched. They are taught by the curator. The curator does give them guidance on what what to research, where to research, things like that. They are a very educated group of people. Additionally, they'll have access through museum resources to the museum library, to institutes of higher learning in the area, to their libraries and collections. I have a friend who's a docent in the Boston area who actually got me access to the Houghton Library at Harvard and to their manuscript collection, which is ridiculously extensive. And I've actually been lucky enough to lead our local scribes on a field trip there twice to do a Pet the Book Day. And let me tell you that holding a letter in your hands written by Charlemagne is great. It's really great. Moving past the people to talk to, we're now to get into the realm of interlibrary loan. If you have a friend who has any affiliation with a university, you have an amazing resource at your fingertips. And I say this because university libraries love to lend with other university libraries. And so that goes for on this side of the pond and elsewhere in the world. To have access to some of the largest libraries in the world can get you more information than even a museum education. Interlibrary loan is an absolute gift. And if you have not, a little known fact for reading rooms at universities, you don't necessarily have to be a student to get a card for the reading room. And the reading room will not allow you to check books out, but it will allow you to sit in the room for an hour or multiple hours and peruse and make notes from anything in their collections. So Marl asked the question, what if the universities you are affiliated with are far, far away? Okay, so in that case, you're going to want to try and find a university closer that you can do interlibrary loan with from the university that you are affiliated with further away. Many universities have reciprocal agreements with each other. And so it's very possible if you get a hold of the university that you are affiliated with and find out where locally you could go to see books through an interlibrary loan program. It's very possible that they have a list of either museums or universities that they are buddies with enough that you could go and see the manuscripts, or not necessarily manuscripts, but the materials that way. So Alan Roberts asked the question, Pet a Book Day, question white gloves, friend or foe? Foe, absolutely. You do not handle manuscripts with gloves on. That has not been the practice for at least 5 years now. There are very, very, very few exceptions to that rule, and it is primarily for books that have been tested for and have high levels of arsenic, because nobody needs that. This is why we do not lick the scrolls, especially if they were made with period pigments. Just don't do that thing. The reason that white gloves fell out of favor for handling manuscripts is it is by and large true that once you put on a pair of gloves, you are slightly less aware of where your hands are and what you're doing. And because the edges of manuscripts, that parchment is so thin and so old that even a hair can cause a rip. White cotton gloves are not smooth. If you use something like nitrile gloves, it actually catches on the page because parchment is skin. And no matter how much you treat it, at the end of the day, it is still skin. And so nitrile gloves just are not recommended at all for manuscripts. And white cotton gloves have actually caused more damage than just bare hands. So as we're all doing very much right now, you wash your hands considerably, you don't touch anything, you go in, you play with the manuscripts for a couple of hours, you leave, you wash your hands immediately. You don't fix your hair, you don't check your phone, things like that. You keep your hands as clean as possible. Being a scribe and being able to hold manuscripts that I've since created scrolls from is a really amazing, it's a really amazing moment. And it really, really puts you in touch with the time periods that we're all emulating. Yes, wash and dry, Marl. Wash and dry your hands very thoroughly. So Ava asks a question, is there a resource that lists the universities allow for interlibrary loan for non-students, or which colleges will not interlibrary loan for non-university libraries? I can use the library at my local university, but I cannot get interlibrary loan. I can only get interlibrary loan through my local library, but I'm concerned that some resources will not be available due to them not being willing to send to a non-university library. That is a very honest concern. This is where having a friend who goes to that university is a great plus. That's not always possible, and I understand where my privilege comes from, that my mother works for a university. So honestly, what I would say is talk to the resource desk at your local library. They might have a list of universities that they can interlibrary. They will have a list of libraries that they can interlibrary loan with. If there isn't one, then it might just come down to the fact that you're going to have to plan a research trip and see if there's a way that you can actually get to that university, arrange a time to meet and do research with them. This is where presenting yourself as an independent scholar can open some doors, because just saying I want to learn more about that cool glass, that doesn't tell them anything. This is where presenting yourself and saying, this is the topic that I'm researching, this is what I'm hoping to find out. I think I can find that out from this item in your collection or from this book in your collection. Is there a way I can gain access to that? And I have hit roadblocks where really the only way it was going to happen was for me to get on a plane and fly across the pond and go to the Bodleian and see if I can actually look at the book. In that case, I bribed a friend of mine who was already going over there with a lot of baked goods and a movie night to do some research for me while she was there. And she was able to, and that worked out. For non-students, this can be very difficult. I haven't, actually. Ava asks, have you ever seen a museum not take an independent researcher seriously because they were not affiliated with the university? I have not, to be perfectly honest, and I'll tell you why. Museums don't have time to research you. They might ask if you're affiliated with the university. The answer would be not yet. Most of them won't ask that, though. I personally have never had a museum go, and what university are you affiliated with? The next best way, if there's a book you're trying to get, that's really a one-on-one thing. In the case of seeing the manuscripts, I wanted personally to just go and look at a couple of manuscripts and get a better sense for a couple of things that I was mulling over through my research. And what it ultimately came down to was the curator looked at me, or not the curator's assistant, looked at me and said, I can't pull that many books for just you. However, you get me 10 people who all want to look at this, who all want to look at the same stuff, and I can set up a day. That I can do something with. Because that falls into the museum's community outreach goals. And you're actually helping them meet quotas at that point. So if there's a series of books that you want to look at, and you know that there's at least 3 or 4 other people, and I put this out kingdom-wide because I wasn't sure that there was 10 people in my local area who wanted to do this. We actually had 15 people total and had to go in 2 shifts because they wouldn't let more than 10 people in the room with the manuscripts all at once. But if you can put together a group and go to the museum and say, my fellow independent researchers and I would like to see this pottery or these lace fragments or these dresses or manuscripts or whatever. Is there a day that we can arrange to have our group come in and see those pieces or see those books? The education department, for the most part, will jump at that chance because you are allowing them time to make a presentation to you. They know that they're pulling things out for a group. And so it's not just one person who's going to come in, spend 10 to 15 minutes, per piece. So an hour tops, and then take off. Quite, Marl. This treadle-driven jade grinding bench. Absolutely. The widget of your dreams. To be able to say I have a group of people who would like to go and see this thing really opens a lot of doors. And I won't lie, I've done it twice now, and both times were because I had research questions. I'm like, hey, let's do another one of these pet the book days because, I need to see this calligraphy hand not on a computer screen. And it does work out very well. And museums and libraries and university libraries as well all have those outreach requirements. And so getting that group together and saying, hey, we're all researching the same thing for slightly different purposes, but we can all garner the same information from this same object, can really, really push you over the edge there. So how many people here are scribes? Just ish. Okay. Ish is good.
Recovering. I'm a recovering, like
You're a recovering scribe. Oh no. So Sav asked the question, how should one prepare to see these pieces to answer as many questions as possible, given that there is a limited time and another visit might not be feasible? Okay, so preparing yourself to visit a museum. First of all, you want to go in business casual clothing because you are serious about the research that you're doing. And so put forward that you are serious about the research that you're doing. It will go a long way, a long way. You will want to have, if you can, a tablet and stylus, because it's very likely that they're not going to let you in there with writing implements. If they do let you in there with writing implements, it will only be pencil. And they may actually give you the pencil and paper once you're in there, because they will have, the tiny pencils, like IKEA pencils, and pads of paper. In a reading room, which is likely where you'll be for, there's a series of books that we all want to look, we all want to research from. In that case, they may allow pen, but still probably not. You'll need to take your own pencils in. Yes, please do not draw on the manuscripts. For photographs, you will want to have a camera with you that you can turn off the flash. That is paramount. You cannot use flash when taking photos of manuscripts, of fiber fragments. Wood might be okay, but probably not. Stone, they might allow. If it's painted, they will not. Books, for the most part, they will not allow flash. So just get it out of your head that you're going to be able to use flash. If you cannot absolutely turn off the flash on your camera, put tape over it, paint over it, construction paper, whatever you want to do. Ensure that that flash will not fire or will not fire out into the room. Just a quick tip on photographing in low light when you can't use a flash. Not sure how many of you have shot a gun. I'm former military. Let me tell you, do not hold your breath. Breathe in, breathe out, and fire. Very simply, if you fill your lungs with air and try to hold it and take the picture, you will be shaky. If you inhale, exhale, and take the picture, you will be 10 times less shaky. Your photos are far more likely to turn out. That's from me to you. And once you're in there, either make a list of questions that you definitely want to answer before you get there. Have them on your phone, have them on your tablet. Some places will allow you to take your laptop in, so you can take notes directly in, whatever note-taking program you use. One of the first things I did was get myself a tablet and a stylus, because there's a museum in Boston that does not allow any pens or pencils at all. And so it was great to be able to walk around and take notes and take sketches from the museum without having to use ink. Alan Roberts points out that a lot of museums don't allow tripods. That is absolutely accurate. However, if you arrange with your liaison beforehand and you're going to be in a room separate from the general public, they might allow you to use a tripod, or they might have one of their tripods on hand for you to use. So ask them about that. If you're going with a private group and it's not a tour through the museum, but you'll actually be in a separate room, the rules might be different. So that is absolutely a question. Marl asks, are you allowed to touch the artifacts to take measurements? And if not, how do you measure them? So you will not be alone in the room with the artifact. You will have either a docent or an associate curator in the room with you. In some cases, if the museum is small enough or the moons are aligned, you'll have the actual curator in there. Sometimes they will allow you to touch it yourself. In cases where you can't, they will, lay things out, grab their rulers. Every museum has photographs of their collection. There was a large push about 10 years ago. There was actually a lot of grant money put aside and has been distributed and is still being distributed for the digitization of artifacts, specifically to digital archive things that are falling apart that we know will not last forever. So if the museum is in, say, Norway, and there's not a real good chance you're going to get to Norway anytime soon, just contacting the museum and saying, do you have more photographs of this item? Because the photograph on their website is probably something that somebody took, that the museum took once it was in the display case and nicely lit and, under glass and all of that. But at some point, that item was in a softbox or was in a room made to be a softbox if it's, a really big item. And that's been photographed from 3 or 4 or 5 angles to really capture that whole item. So it's possible that the images that you need already exist. And for insurance purposes, some of those will have a ruler in them because they need a digital record of how big is that. So absolutely ask the education department, even before you get to the can I come see this in person, ask them if they have those digital files of images of the artifact that you're looking for. So Sav asks, I have hand tremor. Would museums be more likely to allow a tripod if it's a matter of accessibility? Yes, that absolutely comes into play. And again, that's very likely a point where they would say, we have a tripod. The curator will have that for you to use. David says, is it prudent to bring a forensic paper ruler to assist with photos and relative measurements? Every museum in the world has those. So yes, you can bring one if you really feel you need to. That's totally cool. It's not going to take up that much room. But I can guarantee you that I have yet to be to a museum that does not have 100 of those or so sitting in a drawer, because they go through them just as quickly as forensic people do. So the second half of this is a scribal source finding class. that was put together by Master Gundorm Dengir, who has recently received his laurel in dance and research. Ava asks, do museums ever ask to see what you use your research turns into? I have had one, and I simply showed them my blog, and to be honest, they were very impressed. So sometimes yes, but in all of my years of doing this, only once. Master Gunthorm's class goes into exactly how a manuscript is broken down, how a manuscript is composed. I'm actually going to skip a lot of that since we don't have a lot of scribes in this class. It sounds like the scribes we do have probably do know that information. If there's anybody who's particularly interested in that side of this, I can absolutely go into that with you privately. Just send me an email. My email will be in chat at the end of class. So we're going to focus today on what a lot of scribes consider as the two major catalogs for manuscript research. The first is the British Library, and the second is the Bibliothèque Nationale de France. So I'm actually going to put these into chat real quick. That is the first one. That is not going out to everyone, sorry. There we go. And the second one is, so the first link I put into chat is the British Library, and the second is very shortly called Gallica. The reason that most scribes go to the British Library and Gallica are because of the metadata that's included with the manuscripts. The goal of my scribal research and the goal of my scribal practice has largely been to create one-to-one manuscripts to the original. It's actually why I apprenticed to who I did, because she is absolutely brilliant at it. And it has been something that I've been working on for a few years now. One of the most important pieces of information that a scribe needs to achieve that are actual page sizes and text sizes. And both Gallica and British Library have that information included with the metadata for that manuscript. And to be honest, it's invaluable. Their scans are clean. Their color is excellent, and their collections are vast. There are specific lists of manuscripts that do not have a great deal of information. In some cases, they have images of the manuscripts. In some cases, they don't. This would be Harvard and Vatican City. The Vatican Library has been getting a lot better about digitizing their collection. And so that has actually updated since this class was first put together. Those links are, actually, I'll just put up the Vatican link because the Harvard link is still under construction. So there's the Vatican Library. And then there's something called cross-site catalogs. And cross-site catalogs are catalogs specifically that do exactly what it sounds like. They search cross-site. I can honestly say sticking with British Library and Gallica are your best bets, as they really do have the largest collections, especially collections that are digitized. Now that we have some sites to look at, let's look for stuff. You're doing a scroll and you need it to have hedgehogs. The recipient, super big on hedgehogs, absolutely has to be included on the scroll. Not a problem, because medieval people loved painting hedgehogs, so we have plenty to work from. Now we just need to find them. Here you would do an image subject search. Each of these websites breaks down very clearly. You will have to translate the Gallica site and the Vatican Library sites, but Google Translate here is your friend, and Chrome Auto Translate for the web page is actually pretty accurate. If your French is very good, don't worry about it, and if your Latin is decent, also don't worry about it. But when you're doing scribal research at 2 o'clock in the morning, Google Translate is your friend. Here you would search, again, by image subject, and if you really want to actually hit your mark, in all of these, you're going to need to narrow down your time frame. Vatican Library is a little bit easier in this regard because they really limit their search to what they have in their medieval and Renaissance manuscripts. British Library will go from 0 to 2020. So you're really going to want to narrow that search window down to, say, 1100 to 1320, or 1220 to 1420. Just narrow it down to the time period that you want to make the scroll in, and go from there. Alternately, in all of these, you can search by time and place. So say you need to do a scroll that for a 14th century persona, and they are English. So in any of these sites, you can limit the time, and you can limit the place. You would search specifically for, you would search English, or you would search England in either of those cases. If you're doing something for a Flemish persona, you can actually search Flemish and narrow it down by the specific time period. My lord is a Renaissance drummer and has done a great deal of research on these sites for images with drums in them. The great part, particularly about British Library, is, and to be honest, I do go to the British Library a lot for my sources, they have actually gone through each of the manuscripts and written down in text what the images are per page. So if you're looking for ducks, it will pull up every manuscript in whatever time period you give it that has the word duck or ducks in it. And it could just be a duck standing center of, a bar and ivy scroll in the marginalia. But there you go, it's a duck. So it's going to return that search result. Same with time and place. If Belgium, you can search Low Country, which modernly would be Belgium, Netherlands, and Luxembourg. You can search Germany. You can search German. The more specific you get, the fewer results you will get. So if you're not entirely sure what you want your results to be, go broader than you think you need to go. The last way you can search, and particularly for books of hours, is by genre or by iconography. So say you're doing a scroll for a needleworker. You're going to search Saint Veronica, or Hours of the Virgin, or Arachne. All of these I have actually searched these, and it turns up a really fantastic wealth of information as far as imagery containing, needleworkers or spinners or things like that. Okay, so we are at the question and answer period. So if you guys have any other questions for me, go ahead and lay them on me.
The British, I'm looking for, I have not checked out the British Library. I've gone through the British Museum a couple of times looking for items. Do you have any good references for people who are doing more Middle Eastern personas? Moving east towards.
So I can actually still recommend British Library. They have an excellent wealth of Middle Eastern manuscripts. I'm not sure how many of them they acquired. I want to say illegally, but
non-colonially.
Non-colonially, that's a great way to put it. How many of them were gifts and how many of them weren't?
Right.
But I do know that a lot of the major museums have Middle Eastern manuscripts, and there is, just as there is in Europe and in the United States, around the whole world, there is a push to digitize these manuscripts, because we know they're not going to last forever. That they've lasted this long is honestly a blessing. So to have a digital record of these is honestly paramount. So a lot of these have been digitized. There's a number of books that have been written on Middle Eastern manuscripts that have a good deal of history about the manuscripts as well. Some provenance, some creation information. For that, Sav, yes, quite. Sav says, us, how did you amass such a fantastic collection? Museums, fell off a truck. So I know it's awful, but such is the history of the world, sadly. There are, like I said, there's a lot of museums that are pushing to digitize their manuscripts. So I would honestly go and look at some museums in Saudi Arabia, in the UAE, and see what collections they have digitized. It's not a location that I have studied very much, but I do actually have some friends who have. So if you want to message me, I can get you in touch with them and see what information they've been able to find and sources. So.
Okay. Thank you. I was just kind of curious because I know some of us have personas that are a little bit off the
right
traditionally beaten path. So there's His Excellency.
But I love it. I love how many time periods and locations are in the SCA. It's so fantastic to me. Mainly because I don't like painting the same thing all the time. I love mixing it up. So yeah.
Excellent. Did we have anybody else with questions? Because you guys know me, I can come up with.
Let's see. Ava says, what experience do you have going to smaller museums based in historical cloisters or churches, specifically museums who don't have their artifacts online or very good photos? So in the cases of smaller museums, first of all, they're very glad to be noticed. So these are small museums fall into the same category as historic homes. And I do want to point out historic homes have collections too. They may not have large collections, but they do have collections. And you have no idea what kind of weird stuff rich old people get. They have oddly eclectic collections sometimes. If you want to look up oddly eclectic collections, look up Isabella Stewart Gardner. That museum is in Boston, and I could seriously spend a week there and not look at the same thing twice. So for smaller museums, it's very much the same. It's very much the same format as if you're working with a larger museum. Only in this case, the number of people you can email is going to be very short. Sometimes it's just info@themuseumname.org. In cases like that, I would actually skip emailing and call them. Just flat out call them. It might be that they've never thought that somebody's going to want photos of this. I mean, I have seen friends of mine doing research and emailing these tiny institutions, and seriously, the curator is emailing them back going, you want to see what? I mean, sure, but I mean, why? I didn't think anybody but me cared about this thing. So you have no idea what, right. So what I would do is find some, Ava says, what about language barriers? Shortening her question. The museums that she has in mind are in Germany. You'd be surprised how many museums have staff that speak more than one language. The smaller museums may not, but I will guarantee you know somebody in the SCA who knows somebody who knows German. The SCA is like 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon. Somebody somewhere knows German. I have a friend of a friend who's German, who I just sent a Bramberg Cathedral inventory manuscript page from to translate it, because I was writing a scroll text and using those pages as the basis for my scroll. I was like, I don't know what they're saying because this is German. It's not just German, it's old German. It's like 1400s German. What are they saying? And she said it is literally says, this is the chalice of Saint so-and-so, gifted by so-and-so to the town of so-and-so, who gifted it to Bramber Cathedral on such and such a date, the such and such a date being on the feast day of blah, blah, blah saint, who's not the saint who, yeah. It's literally just, this is a blah, blah, yeah. I was like, okay, well, then I can really do whatever I want with the scroll. And she's like, yes, please, just write whatever text you want, it's fine. Yes, Duolingo, Marl says Duolingo. I can definitely recommend Duolingo. Lots of my friends use it very successfully. And yes, Raven points out that a lot of people speak English. That was true of my experience in Germany as well. So it's very likely that the language will not be a barrier. But if it is, I am sure you know somebody who knows somebody. So yeah, yes, when you're dealing with language barriers, that can be particularly difficult. But my best recommendation is to persevere and ask around in your, not just in your local groups, but in your whole kingdom as well. Because I'm not sure how big Antir is. The East is huge. The East is sometimes
We are
bigger
huge
than,
in exactly the same way we go up into Canada.
Yep. Okay. Yeah. So that is true. You guys were bigger than the East Kingdom. I was actually born in Tacoma, but I haven't lived there since I was 3.5. Yay, Air Force family. Come home. Home would actually be St. Louis. It's where I spent more time than anywhere else. My mom would love to have me back in St. Louis, but I know some people in Calligraphers, which that could happen.
Callantir, Ontir, close enough.
It's so similar.
They both end with tier.
David, what was the question that you posted earlier? I'm sorry. Did I not get to it?
My question had to do with finding like resources like not quite Scribble directed, but like letters patent, municipal records, things
Right.
dealing specifically with regulated industries like brewing or nautical exercises and trade.
Those, and I'm sorry I didn't answer this earlier. I will still recommend British Library and Gallica initially for that. Those sorts of letters patent and things, manuscript fragments like that still fall under their digitization. If it's in their collection, they will have photographed it and put it online. The Vatican Library is probably a better resource for those, considering how many of those they held. They have a lot of them anyway. And a lot of the smaller houses, like the Medici were a smaller house, but a lot of those manuscripts have gone to the Vatican Library for conservation and consolidation of the just to consolidate the collection. Some of those still are in private collections in Italy. I wish we could get a hold of them. I have not yet found anybody who has, though. Mainland Europe, a lot of smaller private collections have been folded over into larger university collections or into British Library. That's really become the catch-all as far as Europe is concerned. I would say those are probably the best places to start. So there's my SCA email address. If you want to copy that down and email me, I can put you in touch with some of the people that I go to when I say, hey, I need to do, a letters patent or something like that. I probably have those links saved. Yeah, I just have to comb through my bookmarks, but I could probably help you out with getting you some links for those. Oh, and now it's a real Zoom. We've had a kitten show up.
Thank you.
Yay. All right. Any way to specifically find the accountings of a household doled out after death? Yes, those are again going to be in the house book for the. Oh, there's cats everywhere. This is great. Those would be again in the manuscripts. Any of those books, personal household records, household records, all of that fall into the category of manuscripts. And so those would be in a standard manuscript search. You could search household, you could search records book for key terms, something like that. Will and Testament might get you what you're looking for. That's a kind of modern terminology for it, though. Bequeathments. I have not personally done those searches because those don't tend to have a lot of painting in them. So that's not often what I go to for a scroll. But those books, those records would be in the manuscript records. Okay, if that being all.
I have an example of a local repository of digitization within Terra Pomaria. I'm going to share in the links real quick. I've already
Excellent.
shared with
From
Their
a
Excellencies.
nearby group.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Your Excellency, Sebastian, for sharing this link. I was unaware and am ashamed that I did not think about this. We have an abbey within the bounds of Terra Pomaria, and Sebastian brought to my attention that they actually have a repository of 12th century and later documents.
Fantastic.
So that is also something to remember, I guess, because we have some decent universities on this side of the world. Some of them occasionally have.
You have some very decent universities.
Oh, we just had a question from Ava. You guys have a book week? You can buy manuscript pages?
Right. So that doesn't happen just in New York City. That actually happens many, many different places. They are often called book fairs or ephemera sales. But yes, there are very often manuscripts and manuscript fragments for sale. There's a bookstore actually 2 blocks from where I work in the city of Boston, which of course I haven't been to since March, but I've been to the bookstore and longer than that because it's a very dangerous place. But they have some ephemera and manuscript pages for sale in that tiny bookstore. So
Road trip? We could totally go on a road trip.
Commonwealth Books. That's what it's
Okay.
called. Commonwealth Books.
We should go visit Boston is what I'm hearing.
You should definitely come visit Boston. As soon as we can travel again, you should come out. It'll be very good. Well, thank you everyone for having me out. It was a lot of fun. And again, my email is in the chat if you guys have any questions. Have a good night.
Thank you
Thank you.
again. It was
Thank
a
you.
marvelous.
Thank you very much for coming out and teaching this class.
You're welcome. You're absolutely welcome.
We will
Alrighty.
see you, I'm sure, someday when you come to visit Terra Pomaria.
Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Good night, everyone.
Good
Good
night.
night.